Hello everyone, Cartothelissa here, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about inter-service transfers. So this video is going to be aimed at those that are serving in one branch of service and hoping to transfer to a different branch of service. So I'm going to give you guys some really helpful tips on how to complete this process. I'm also going to talk to you guys about things like the eligibility criteria. So make sure you stick around to the end to hear all of the steps that you need to complete, and to also hear some tips to make sure that everything's on the up and up. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I actually did an intra-service transfer, meaning I stayed in the same branch but switched from one MOS to another. And then I also did an inter-service switch, meaning I went from one military branch, the Army, to a completely different branch, the Air Force. So I did Army ROTC. I commissioned as a military intelligence officer. After serving as an intelligence officer for a few years, I decided I wanted to join the Judge Advocate General's Corps. So that's when I did the intra-service transfer, and I transferred from the military intelligence branch to the Judge Advocate branch within the Army. And then once I had completely finished with my 8-year obligation to the Army, I decided that instead of getting out of the military altogether, I would go to the Air Force. Check out a different branch. Why not? One important thing to remember is not many people do an inter-service transfer. Most people just spend their whole military career in the Army, or they spend their whole career in the Air Force. But just because it doesn't happen often doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And I understand that there's not a lot of information online about this process, and that's because it is uncommon. But if any of you are nearing the end of your service obligation and you're thinking of getting out, you should definitely check out other branches. Just because you don't like the Army doesn't mean you won't like the Air Force, for instance. And you're walking away from a lot of important benefits if you walk away before you put in that 20, because we're all, of course, mindful of those retirement benefits that we get once we hit our 20 years of creditable, service. So I would encourage you all to think about an inter or intra branch transfer if maybe you're not liking the particular MOS or the branch that you're in. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily leave the military altogether. You might find that you really enjoy a different branch. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the IST program. Now, most branches have this program, and I'm going to talk first about what the Air Force has going on, and then I'm going to talk about what the Army has going on. So in the Air Force, if you are an officer in a different branch, you can always request an inter-service transfer. And if you are looking to transfer into a critically manned career field within the Air Force, your application is going to receive, serious consideration. Now, the kicker, of course, is you have to follow the rules set forth by the branch that you're currently in. So again, you can, apply to the Air Force and try to transfer over into the Air Force as an officer from a different branch, but you got to make sure you're following your current branch's rules. So I'm going to give you some information actually. So if you're in the Army, you're going to want to look at AR 614-120, and it's right up here in case you missed it. If you're in the Navy, you're going to want to look at Mil-Persman 300-81, and it's right here for you. If you're currently in the Marine Corps, you're going to want to look at MCO 1001.65, right up here. And if you're currently in the Coast Guard, you're going to look at Military Separation Chapter 1, Section 1.A.3, and that's right up here. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you decide you want to transfer into the Air Force as an officer is look at the Parent Service Authority. So again, if you're in the Army, you're going to look at the AR. If you're in the Navy, you're going to look at Mil-Persman, and so forth and so on. Also, officers hoping to get into the Air Force as an officer have to meet the eligibility criteria for appointment in AFMAN 36-2032, and that's military recruiting and accessions. Inter-service transfer requires that officers be discharged from their current commissions and appointed in the Air Force without an interruption of total service. So for instance, when I was honorably discharged from the Army, I was immediately appointed into the Air Force as an officer the very next day. So you're going to make sure that your discharge from one branch, the Army for instance, is the day before your appointment in a different branch. So for instance, you would receive an honorable discharge from the Army dated March 26th, and then you're going to, have paperwork showing that you were appointed as an officer in the Air Force on March 27th. Another thing that you should be doing throughout this whole process is keeping your current chain of command apprised of what you're wanting to do. And also a helpful tip is to keep in mind why you want to transfer, because people are going to be asking, why do you want to transfer? And it might be that you feel like the Air Force bases are located, near family or whatnot. It might be that your MOS in the Army is going away and you want to continue service, but in a different branch. So just be thinking about why you want to transfer, and just be mindful that people are going to be asking you, within your chain of command, hey, why do you want to leave the Army? And so just, have some reasons jotted down. And another thing you're going to want to make sure you do is carry over your rank and your date of rank. So some people only pay attention to the fact that they're leaving the Army as a captain and they're taking an appointment in the Air Force as a captain. No, it doesn't stop there. If you are a captain in the Army with 3 years time in service, you want to make sure you're going to be a captain in the Air Force with 3 years time in service. And it matters because, of course, you need to be a captain for at least 4 years before you can be considered for promotion to major. So make sure the rank and the date of rank will transfer over. Now, the Army also has a similar program, and it's also called the Inter-Service Transfer Program. It's formally known as Blue to Green, and this program allows you to it allows you to come in from a different branch to the Army. Now, the enlisted program qualifications, if you're an E1 through E5, you will retain your grade and same date of rank. If you're an E5 or above, then you're going to have to get that eligibility determined by CG. Now, you must have an approved DD Form 368, so I'm going to put this right here. And not only that, of course, you must pass a MEPS physical, you must meet the Army height and weight standards, and you can find those online. If you are a commissioned officer or a warrant officer in a different branch and you're looking to come over to the Army, just note that the active component of the Army does accept IST applications, so inter-service transfers as well. And you're going to make sure that you again are keeping your chain of command up to date on all of this. And something to keep in mind if you're looking to transfer into the Army is that service members with more than a 5-year break in service, or those that have not completed Army BCT, will have to attend Army basic training. And another thing to keep in mind about the Army's transfer program is generally with this program, you have to complete your service obligation to your current branch first. And of course, your current branch has to be willing to release you to the Army. So that's just kind of the quick ground rules for switching either from one branch into the Army or switching from one branch into the Air Force. And I'll tell you a little bit about my experience. So for me, it wasn't that difficult to go from being a military intelligence officer in the Army to being a judge advocate in the Army, because I did stay in the Army and I was still, fulfilling my service obligation to the Army. Although when I transferred from being a military intelligence officer to being a judge advocate, I did lose 1 year time and grade, and that's just because the Army brings you in as a judge advocate under, the rule that you're going to be appointed as a first lieutenant with 1 year time and grade. And I was actually a first lieutenant with 2 years time and grade. So that backed my promotion to captain up just a little bit. And that's why I wanted to, make you guys aware that this is a possibility. And you got to make sure that that's, something you're willing to do to transfer in case that's required. This isn't, the same across the board. So just make sure you're checking all the paperwork and keeping your T's dotted or crossed and your I's dotted. Now, when I switched, and this is the crazy thing, so I actually lost time and grade when I went from military intelligence in the Army to judge advocate in the Army. But I didn't lose any rank or time and grade when I completely left the Army and came into the Air Force. And again, when I left the Army and came into the Air Force, I had already fulfilled my initial 8-year service obligation. And when I came into the Air Force, I didn't incur any additional service obligation. As officers, we do not re-up, so to speak. So once we serve our 8-year initial obligation, we don't sign a brand new 8-year obligation. So I didn't, incur a brand new service obligation. But of course the Air Force, if you're going into the Air Force, wants to know that you're going to hang around for at least 3 or 4 years. And I've been in the Air Force since 2012. So I've hung around a lot more than 3 or 4 years. And because I was going from being a judge advocate in the Army to being a judge advocate in the Air Force, I did not have to incur any additional training obligation either. But of course, if you're going into a completely different career field, then there would be some, training involved for you. And I am, of course, focusing more on the officer inter-service and intra-service transfers. But I understand that, enlisted personnel might want to transfer as well. It's just with the enlisted personnel, generally you do complete your 4-year or 8-year service obligation first. But again, you're generally going to be discharged one day from one service and then you're appointed in a different service the very next day. So there's no service interruption. And of course, there's always the possibility of getting out of the military entirely and then coming back into the military through a different branch. But I would recommend against doing that simply because, like I read earlier, if it's been more than 5 years, then you might end up having to go do, basic training or boot camp again, and nobody wants that, right? So I would recommend you start looking at the transfer process while you're actually still in. And talk to people, that have made the switch. Get some ideas from them as well. I'm talking to you about my experience. People have different experiences. And actually, one of the really, really helpful websites that you should definitely go look at, and I'll put a link below, is it's goarmy.com, and it's under transitioning services and the inter-service transfer program. So if you go there, you can pull up all kinds of information about how to come into the Army from a different branch. And then earlier I was talking about the Air Force's program. And so you can go to the Air Force's Personnel Center and specifically look at inter-service transfer program, and you can find out all kinds of useful information about how to transfer into the Air Force. Now, the Air Force is the smallest branch, and so it is generally considered to be the toughest to get into. And remember, with the Air Force, if you're looking to get in, you really need to be looking at one of the critically manned career fields. So, what am I talking about? Let's say, for instance, so if you're looking to do something like how to pilot a remotely piloted aircraft, that would be a critically manned career field right now. combat systems officer, electrical engineer is really big right now. But again, you can explore this further by going to the website that I mentioned. But it's just something you really, before you start the process, you need to visit these websites. You need to visit the ARs and the AFIs that I read off earlier, and also make sure you're keeping your chain of command in the loop, and make sure you're not losing your grade or your time in grade. All right, and if you have any more specific questions, be sure to drop them below. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.